Before the story starts, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
HOA built a pipeline on my land, so I shut off their supply. It was a quiet morning in the small neighborhood where John lived. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Birds chirped, and everything seemed peaceful. John loved his home. He had bought this land years ago, dreaming of a place where he could relax, enjoy nature, and escape the chaos of the city. He never imagined that today would be the day everything would change. As he stepped out of his house, he noticed something unusual. At first, he thought it was his neighbor's crew doing some gardening work. But as he walked closer, he saw large machines, pipes, and workers digging into the ground. His heart sank. Something was happening on his land, something he had not approved. John quickly approached one of the workers. "Excuse me," he said, trying to stay calm. "Whose land is this?" The worker looked at him briefly and shrugged. "It's the HOA. We're installing a new pipeline." John's stomach turned. The HOA? On his land? Without telling him? He had received no letters, no warnings, no meetings about this. He had always followed the rules, paid his dues on time, and now this? They were literally digging into his property without permission. He took a deep breath and walked towards the construction. He needed answers. He needed someone who could explain this madness. But as he got closer, he noticed the pipeline they were building. It wasn't just small pipes, it was a large, metal structure that would cut right through his backyard, destroying the garden he had planted with his own hands. John felt a mix of anger and disbelief. He remembered all the times he had attended HOA meetings, asking questions, trying to understand their plans. He had never heard of any project like this. He felt like someone had pulled a fast one, quietly moving ahead while pretending everything was normal. He asked one of the supervisors, "Do you have any papers? Any permit to do this?" The supervisor scratched his head. Yeah, it's approved by the HOA board. They handle all that stuff." John's blood boiled. "But this is my land. You can't just come and build something without my permission." The supervisor shrugged again. "That's HOA rules. We just follow the orders." John looked around. There were workers everywhere, machines digging, metal pipes stacked neatly on the side. He felt small, powerless, and furious all at the same time. The more he watched, the more he realized how serious this situation was. This wasn't just a small mistake, they were deliberately ignoring his ownership rights. He decided to take pictures. Every pipe, every machine, every worker. He needed proof in case things got worse. As he snapped the photos, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. This wasn't something he could ignore. He needed a plan. John went back inside his house, pacing back and forth. He thought about calling the HOA, but he knew from experience that their office was slow, and the board often ignored complaints from homeowners. He needed something more, something that would make them listen. He sat down at his computer and started digging. He pulled up his property documents, past HOA agreements, and local laws about land ownership. He found that the HOA had certain rights in shared areas, but this part of the land was specifically his. No shared easement, no public right-of-way, just his property. A cold feeling ran down his spine. They had no legal right to be there. Yet, they were working as if everything was fine, as if they owned his land. John clenched his fists. He knew one thing: if he didn't act fast, his land would be ruined, and no one could undo it. He decided to confront the HOA. He called the board's number and asked for an immediate meeting. As expected, the receptionist was polite but vague. "The board is busy, sir. They'll get back to you." John hung up, frustrated. He couldn't wait. The construction was moving quickly, and every minute mattered. He grabbed his jacket and headed back outside. He needed to see the pipeline for himself and maybe talk to the workers again. As he reached the site, he noticed something else. Some neighbors had started to gather. Some were curious, others were shocked. A few whispered, "That's John's land, why are they digging there?" John felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't alone in noticing this. Maybe if enough people stood with him, the HOA would have to listen. But he also knew that hope alone wasn't enough. He needed a strategy, and fast. The sun was higher now, casting sharp shadows across the ground. John walked slowly along the edge of his property, inspecting every inch of the area the pipeline would pass through. He imagined his garden being destroyed, trees being cut, flowers trampled. His peaceful backyard, his sanctuary, would be gone in a matter of hours if he didn't stop them. He turned to the workers. "Stop! You're on private property." One of the workers looked annoyed. "Sir, we're following orders. Talk to the HOA." John shook his head, anger rising. "No! I'm talking to you now. You have to stop, or I will take action." The workers hesitated, glancing at each other, then back at the supervisor. John could see uncertainty in their eyes. For the first time, he realized that not everyone there was comfortable with what was happening. Maybe he could use that. Maybe he could find an ally. As he stepped back, he took a deep breath. This was only the beginning. He didn't know exactly how he would stop the HOA, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to give up his land without a fight. And at that moment, the camera could almost capture the determination in his eyes, the quiet fire of someone who had been pushed too far. The HOA had no idea what was coming. John was about to turn a peaceful morning into a battle for his property. Little did he know, the next few days would be full of tension, clever plans, and confrontations that would change the neighborhood forever. The discovery was just the start. And as he stood there, staring at the large metal pipes cutting through his backyard, he whispered to himself. "They think they can take what's mine. They're about to find out they were wrong." The next morning, John woke up with a sense of urgency. His land, the place he had nurtured for years, was still being invaded. The noise of machines had already begun before sunrise. He didn't need coffee to wake him up. Anger and determination fueled him. He stepped outside, and the sight made his stomach twist. The workers were moving faster, digging deeper, laying pipes like they were building a highway through someone else's home. John clenched his fists. This wasn't just a mistake, they were ignoring him completely. He walked straight to the site, his steps firm, his eyes scanning every movement. He noticed that the supervisor was talking on the phone, probably reporting progress to the HOA board. John cleared his throat. "Stop! You cannot do this. This is my land." The supervisor looked up, startled, as if he hadn't noticed John there before. "Sir, we have orders," he said slowly, carefully. "The HOA approved this. There's nothing I can do." John felt a rush of disbelief. "Orders? You call destroying someone's private property an order?" His voice shook, but he forced himself to stay calm. Calm would be his weapon, even as anger burned inside him. The workers stopped for a moment, some exchanging uneasy glances. John noticed that not all of them looked confident. Some seemed worried, as if they had realized that what they were doing might not be right. That tiny spark of hope gave him a small edge. Maybe they could be persuaded to question the orders. He moved closer to the supervisor. "Listen, I know the law. You cannot build on my property without my permission. I will not let this happen quietly." The supervisor's eyes flicked nervously toward the machines. I'm just following instructions. The HOA handles all that legal stuff. You'll have to talk to them." John shook his head. "No! I'm talking to you now. You can stop this right now, or things will get complicated." His voice was calm but firm, like a storm waiting to break. The supervisor hesitated. For a brief second, John thought he might actually stop the work. But then he sighed and stepped back. "I'm sorry. I can't. They've told me to continue." John's heart sank, but he refused to give up. He looked around and noticed a neighbor watching from across the street, shaking his head in disbelief. More eyes were on him now. Maybe the neighborhood could witness what was happening, maybe they could support him. He knelt down near one of the freshly dug trenches and placed his hand on the soil. It felt warm, alive. This was his land, his sanctuary. And he realized something important: if he stayed silent, no one else would fight for it. He needed a plan, a real plan, not just angry words. He stood up and called the HOA office directly. "This is John. I'm standing on my property. Your crew is digging without my permission. You need to stop them immediately." The voice on the other end was calm, almost indifferent. "Mr. John, the HOA board has approved this. There's nothing we can do at this time. The work will continue." John's hands tightened around his phone. He realized the truth: the HOA didn't care. They were confident that he would back down, that he would sit quietly and let them destroy his land. But he wasn't going to. Not him. He hung up and turned to face the supervisor again. This time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: a small hesitation in the workers' eyes. Some were starting to doubt. That was his moment. He took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "Everyone here has a choice. You don't have to destroy this land. You can stop. You can do the right thing. Don't let them use you to break the law." A few workers exchanged glances. The supervisor's face tightened. He knew John was right, but he also knew he was under pressure from the HOA. The air felt thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. John didn't wait for them to answer. He knew words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed evidence, proof that the HOA was acting against the law. He pulled out his phone again and started recording the entire scene. Machines digging, pipes being laid, workers hesitating, and the supervisor trying to stay in control. It was all there, all captured. As he recorded, he noticed a small crowd of neighbors gathering. Whispers spread quickly: "That's John's land, the HOA has no right." John felt a surge of confidence. He wasn't alone. The HOA might think they could intimidate him, but the truth was now visible to everyone. Suddenly, one of the workers stopped mid-task. I don't think this is right," he said, voice shaking. "Maybe we should wait until the owner approves?" The supervisor's face turned red with frustration. "Do your job," he barked. But the seed of doubt was already planted. The confrontation had begun not just between John and the HOA, but between right and wrong, between people blindly following orders and someone willing to fight for what was his. John took a step back, surveying the scene. Machines were paused, some workers hesitated, and neighbors were watching. He knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time, he felt a sense of control. The HOA might have had money and authority, but he had truth, courage, and determination. And in that moment, he realized something chilling: the HOA had underestimated him. They thought he was just another homeowner who would stay silent. They didn't know that John was about to turn this quiet neighborhood battle into a fight they would never forget. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the freshly dug trenches, John whispered to himself. "They wanted to ignore me. They wanted to take my land. But this is my property, my rules. And I will make sure they pay for every inch they try to steal." The confrontation had begun. And little did the HOA know, John was already planning his next move, a plan so clever and daring, it might just stop them in their tracks. After the confrontation, John returned to his house, his mind racing. The sunlight felt harsh, almost accusing, as if reminding him that the battle had just begun. He couldn't stop thinking about the machines, the pipes, and the way the HOA had ignored him. The reality was clear: talking wasn't enough. He needed a plan. John sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He pulled up his property documents and scanned through them carefully. Every line, every clause, every map of his land became a potential weapon. His land was fully his, legally, with no easement for the HOA to dig a pipeline. A small smile appeared on his face. Finally, there was a way forward, he just had to use it wisely. He spent hours researching local laws, HOA rules, and property rights. Every website, forum, and legal article he could find became part of his education. He learned about easements, permits, and violations. He even discovered some cases where homeowners had successfully stopped illegal constructions on their property. The more he read, the more confident he became. The HOA might have money and influence, but John had knowledge, and knowledge could be powerful. As night fell, John spread papers all over his dining table, property maps, HOA agreements, legal articles. He highlighted sections, wrote notes, and connected dots. He realized something important: he couldn't just confront them physically or verbally. He needed a strategy that combined law, evidence, and clever tactics. He paused and stared at the pipes and the images he had taken earlier. Those pipes were the key. If he could stop the supply temporarily, it would force the HOA to take him seriously. But he had to be careful. Any illegal move could backfire. He needed something clever, something unexpected, something that would make them pause in their tracks. John also considered the human side of the situation. Some workers had seemed uneasy. Maybe he could appeal to their sense of right and wrong. Maybe some of them could help him, or at least hesitate enough to slow the construction. He made a mental note: patience and observation would be as important as any legal argument. Late into the night, he began to write down his plan step by step. First, gather evidence, photos, videos, timestamps. Second, consult local laws and find a legal way to stop the work. Third, create leverage using the HOA's dependence on the pipeline. They couldn't continue without the supply. He realized one more thing: timing was crucial. If he acted too soon, they might override him. Too late, and the pipeline would be finished. He had to find the exact moment when his action would have the maximum impact. John leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He felt the weight of the challenge, but also a strange thrill. For the first time, the battle didn't feel hopeless. Every hour of research had armed him with knowledge, every detail of the pipeline became a piece of his puzzle. He could see a way to win, to protect his land, and to show the HOA that they could not mess with him. He imagined the moment when the HOA would finally realize their mistake. The thought made him smile, a small, confident curve of lips in the dim light. He imagined the supervisor's face, the hesitant workers, and even the neighbors watching as John executed his plan. It was like a chess game, each move calculated, each piece important. By the early morning, John had a blueprint ready, not of the pipeline, but of how he would stop it. He would not act recklessly, he would act smartly. He would make the HOA see that their arrogance had consequences. And he knew one more thing: once he began, there would be no turning back. John closed his laptop and looked out the window. The neighborhood was quiet, but the tension was there, like a wire stretched tight, ready to snap. He whispered to himself, "I will protect what's mine. They think they're in control, but the truth is, I'm ready. And soon, they will understand." The plan was forming, the pieces were in place, and the next chapter of this battle was about to begin. John wasn't just fighting for land anymore, he was fighting for justice, respect, and the principle that no one could take what belonged to him without a fight. And in the shadows of his backyard, the pipeline waited. But John knew something the HOA didn't: the battle had already shifted in his favor. All he needed now was the perfect moment. The morning air was thick with tension as John stepped outside. He felt the weight of every passing minute. The pipeline was moving forward faster than he had anticipated. If he didn't act soon, his land, his sanctuary, would be irreversibly damaged. Today, talking was over. It was time for the first move. John walked along the edge of his property, scanning the construction site. The supervisor and workers were already there, unaware that John was no longer just a frustrated homeowner, he was a strategist, a protector of his land. He noticed subtle cracks in their confidence, hesitant glances, slower movements, nervous whispers. These small cracks were his opening. He approached the supervisor with calm determination. "Stop the machines. Now!" The supervisor froze. "Sir, we can't. We're following orders from the HOA." "You'll have to." John interrupted, holding up his phone. "I have every word you said on camera. I have photos, videos, timestamps. I know the law. If you continue, you're breaking it. And I promise you, consequences will follow." For a moment, silence fell over the site. Machines hummed quietly, workers paused mid-action, and even the birds seemed to sense the tension. The supervisor looked around nervously, realizing for the first time that John was serious. John didn't wait for approval. He moved to the nearest access point of the pipeline and began inspecting it. He noted a valve, small enough to turn off the supply temporarily but crucial enough to halt operations. This was his first real step, a calculated, careful action that would show the HOA he meant business without breaking any laws. As he worked, he noticed a few workers watching him, hesitant. One whispered, he might be right. Should we stop? John kept his focus, knowing he had to maintain authority. You don't have to help me, but don't interfere with my property. That's all I ask. His voice was calm, but firm, a tone that brooked no argument. The supervisor, sensing the growing chaos, tried to reassert control. Do your jobs. Keep working. But the workers had seen John's confidence. Doubt had already taken root. The sound of digging slowed, machines paused, and the pipeline construction faltered. John realized he had already won half the battle. Momentum was on his side. He stepped back and watched. The small crowd of neighbors had started gathering again, murmuring, pointing. The whispers spread like wildfire. This is John's land, he's stopping them. The HOA had unknowingly created an audience for his first action. Public opinion was now a silent ally. John felt a surge of adrenaline. This was only the first attempt, but it was enough to shake the confidence of the people who thought they could ignore him. Yet, he knew it wasn't enough to stop the HOA permanently. They would regroup, find loopholes, and push forward. His first action had to serve as both a warning and a setup for the next step, a larger, more decisive move. As he turned away, he whispered to himself, almost like a vow. This is just the beginning. They think this is a minor obstacle. They have no idea what's coming next. The supervisor glared at him, frustrated, powerless, while the hesitant workers exchanged uneasy glances. John knew the HOA would respond, probably with threats, letters, or legal notices. But for the first time, the balance of power had shifted slightly. He had shown that he was not just defending his land, he was actively fighting for it. By the end of the day, John returned home, exhausted but energized. The first attempt had worked, not completely, but enough to send a clear message. He had tested the ground, observed reactions, and confirmed that his strategy had potential. In the quiet of his home, he mapped out the next moves. Each piece of evidence, every hesitant worker, and every neighbor's whisper became part of his plan. The battle was far from over. In fact, the first attempt had only raised the stakes, and the coming days would demand even more cleverness, courage, and audacity. John leaned against his desk, staring at the city lights beyond his backyard. The pipeline loomed like a silent enemy, but he was no longer afraid. The first attempt had proven one thing: the HOA had underestimated him. And the more they pushed, the stronger his resolve would grow. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin. The night was quiet, but John's mind was alive with activity. Every thought, every detail from the previous days spun in his head like a puzzle. He had tested the waters, observed reactions, and collected evidence. Now it was time for the real plan, one that would stop the HOA from continuing their illegal pipeline once and for all. John spread out his maps, his photos, and legal notes on the table. Each line of the pipeline, each valve, each piece of equipment became a potential leverage point. He wasn't just planning to stop the construction temporarily, he wanted a move so clever that the HOA wouldn't know what hit them. He studied the pipe network carefully. There was a small, crucial section where a valve controlled the main flow. If turned off properly, the entire section would halt, forcing the HOA to face immediate consequences. But it had to be done legally, no vandalism, no breaking the law. Just smart use of the system itself. John's plan had multiple layers. Evidence layer, capture every moment on camera, workers, supervisors, machines, the entire pipeline. Proof was his shield. Timing layer, wait until the pipeline was in active use but before it was fully functional. Strike when it hurt them most. Human layer, appeal subtly to the hesitant workers. Some were already questioning what they were doing. They could slow down or pause, giving John more control. Legal layer, be ready with local property laws. Any pushback from the HOA could be countered immediately. John looked at his reflection in the window. He whispered to himself. They think they're untouchable. They think I'm just another homeowner. They don't know I've studied every move, every rule, every mistake they could make. The next morning, he returned to his land before the workers arrived. The air was crisp, almost electric. He checked the valve, inspected its mechanism, and ran a mental simulation. Every step had to be precise. One mistake in the plan could fail or worse, backfire. As the crew arrived, John stayed hidden at first, observing. He noticed the supervisor barking orders, trying to regain control after John's first attempt had shaken their confidence. Some workers still hesitated, glancing toward John's property line. That hesitation was critical. It was the perfect moment to act. John approached calmly, hands visible, showing no aggression. I'm not here to fight, he said, projecting confidence. I just want to make sure we do this correctly, legally. Otherwise, problems will follow. The supervisor frowned. Problems? John nodded slowly. Yes. You are on private property. I have the right to stop the work. And I have proof. You can continue at your own risk. Workers exchanged nervous looks. Some whispered quietly among themselves. John noticed a few moving slightly slower, subtly giving him space. His first layer of the plan, the human layer, was working. He moved to the valve and, with careful precision, adjusted it. Instantly, the flow in the pipeline slowed to a crawl, halting operations without breaking anything. Machines idled, workers panicked slightly, and the supervisor rushed over, confused and angry. What did you do? The supervisor yelled. John stood firm. I followed the law. I protected my property. The pipeline cannot operate here without my permission. You need to stop immediately until this matter is resolved. The tension was unbearable. Workers were frozen, unsure of who to follow. The supervisor tried to argue, but John's evidence and calm confidence were overwhelming. Even the neighbors, who had started gathering quietly, watched in awe. The scene was cinematic, powerful, quiet, and charged with suspense. John knew the HOA would escalate soon. They might send lawyers, threaten him, or try to intimidate him. But he had layered his plan carefully. The flow was stopped, the evidence was clear, and the neighborhood was on his side. The HOA's arrogance had finally met a challenge they couldn't ignore. As he stepped back, John whispered under his breath. This is just the beginning. They wanted to use my land as if it were theirs. Now, they'll see what happens when someone refuses to stay silent. The plan had succeeded in its first stage, the pipeline was halted, tension was high, and suspense reached its peak. The HOA had been caught off guard, and John had proven that clever thinking, patience, and courage could outmatch authority. But John knew this was only one move in a bigger battle. The coming days would test his resolve, his strategy, and his patience. One thing was certain, the HOA had no idea what was coming next. And as John walked back toward his house, the night sky stretched above him, dark and endless, he felt a thrill he had never felt before. The fight for his land was no longer just about property, it was about justice, pride, and proving that one determined person could stand up against the system. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon when John stepped outside. The world was quiet, almost suspiciously calm, as if it knew the storm about to unfold. Today was the day. All his planning, research, and preparation would either succeed spectacularly or backfire. John approached the valve again. His fingers brushed the cool metal. He took a deep breath, focusing. One wrong move, and the HOA could call the authorities, dismiss him, or even continue without him. But he was ready. Every precaution, every contingency had been mapped out. The workers arrived, machines humming and dirt flying in the air. John stayed in plain sight, calm, confident. He knew their hesitation would work in his favor. He began adjusting the valve, slowly, carefully, watching the pressure gauges. Instantly, the pipeline slowed, choked, and then halted completely. A shout erupted. "What are you doing?" the supervisor screamed, running over. His face was red with fury and confusion. John didn't flinch. I am protecting my land. This pipeline cannot operate without my permission. Stop immediately or face the consequences." The workers froze. Some whispered among themselves, clearly unsure what to do. A few, who had hesitated before, stepped back, leaving space for John. The subtle human layer of his plan had worked perfectly. The sound of idling machines filled the air, broken only by angry shouts and nervous murmurs. Neighbors peeked from windows and yards, watching the unfolding chaos. The scene was tense, cinematic, and almost surreal. The supervisor lunged forward, but John calmly raised a hand. "Stop! One more step, and this is evidence against you. Don't make it worse." The chaos escalated. Phones rang frantically in the HOA office. Orders were shouted, letters were drafted, and the board panicked as news of the halted pipeline spread. John stood quietly, his calm in the center of the storm, knowing that this pause was temporary but powerful. One of the hesitant workers finally spoke up, voice trembling, maybe he's right. "Should we continue?" The supervisor gaped, realizing that his control had slipped. Panic flashed across his face. Every machine that moved, every order shouted, every frustrated gesture only emphasized how unprepared the HOA was for someone like John, someone who refused to be intimidated. John glanced at the neighbors. They had started murmuring among themselves. Public attention was now a silent but undeniable ally. If the HOA tried to push further, they would have witnesses, proof, and backlash. The balance of power had shifted dramatically. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat ran down John's forehead, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. He had to stay calm, observe reactions, and maintain control. Every second counted. Finally, the supervisor yelled into his radio, trying to regain some authority. "Get legal here. Now! Stop him!" John smiled faintly. This was exactly the reaction he had hoped for. The HOA had no idea that every move they were making, every word shouted, was now recorded and documented. Evidence, timing, and strategy had converged perfectly. The chaos reached a peak. Workers argued quietly among themselves, unsure who to obey. The supervisor stomped back and forth, red-faced, trying to intimidate John, but intimidation no longer worked. The audience, the neighbors, the hesitant workers, and John himself, was now witnessing a turning point. John whispered to himself, almost like a vow. "They thought they could take what's mine. They thought I would stay silent. But now, they're learning, this land has an owner who won't back down." By mid-morning, the situation had stabilized, not in favor of the HOA, but in favor of John. The pipeline was halted, confusion reigned, and John had proven that courage, strategy, and careful planning could overpower authority. As he stepped back, watching the chaos unfold, John knew one thing clearly: this was not the end. The HOA would respond, escalate, and fight back. But he had the upper hand now. The first execution had succeeded, tension had peaked, and the stage was set for the final resolution. The day ended with a quiet sense of victory for John, even amid the storm he had created. He returned to his house, exhausted but exhilarated. Outside, the pipes remained still, silent witnesses to the battle he had begun and the fight that was far from over. The sun was setting, painting the neighborhood in deep orange and gold. The day had been tense, chaotic, and exhausting, but John felt a quiet satisfaction. The pipeline had stopped, the HOA had stumbled, and the balance of power had shifted. His land, his sanctuary, had survived for now. The supervisor was nowhere in sight, probably running frantic calls to the HOA board. The workers, hesitant and uneasy, had started packing up for the day. Some gave John wary nods, as if acknowledging that they had witnessed something extraordinary. John walked slowly along his backyard, inspecting the halted pipeline. He ran his fingers over the soil, the same soil he had defended tirelessly. Every step felt heavy with victory. Every glance over his shoulder reminded him that this battle had not just been about land, it had been about respect, principle, and standing up for what was right. But even as he felt relief, John knew the HOA would not surrender quietly. He imagined the letters, the phone calls, the threats to come. And yet, he also knew that this time, he had the upper hand. Every move, every hesitation by the HOA, had been documented. Every witness, every recording, was his shield. That evening, neighbors quietly approached him. Some whispered congratulations, others shared astonishment at his courage. The quiet support of the community, which he hadn't expected, made him realize something powerful: he wasn't just fighting alone. When one person stood for what was right, others could be inspired to stand as well. As John returned home, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. Sitting at his desk, he reviewed the recordings, the photographs, and the notes from the past week. The evidence was clear: the HOA had acted without authority, overstepped boundaries, and underestimated the homeowner who refused to stay silent. Then, as he leaned back in his chair, a small smirk crossed his face. He realized the twist no one had expected: he didn't just stop the pipeline, he had forced the HOA to reveal their arrogance and weaknesses in front of the entire neighborhood. What they thought was a small, routine project had turned into a public spectacle exposing their mistakes. John whispered to himself, almost amused. They thought they owned the land. They thought they could intimidate me. But in the end, I made them show everyone who they really are. The night grew quiet. The pipeline lay silent, the neighborhood calm, and John felt a sense of victory that was more than physical, it was moral and strategic. He had proven that clever thinking, patience, and courage could outmatch authority, and that sometimes, the quietest person could create the loudest impact. Yet, in the back of his mind, John knew this was not the absolute end. The HOA would regroup, they might challenge him legally, they might try again. But he was ready. He had the knowledge, the strategy, and the confidence to protect his home, his land, and his principles. And as he stepped outside one last time, looking at the calm neighborhood under the starlit sky, John realized something profound: the battle had been about more than a pipeline. It had been about standing firm, thinking cleverly, and never letting anyone take what is rightfully yours. The pipeline was stopped, the HOA humbled, and John? John was ready for whatever came next. And in that quiet night, a final thought crossed his mind with a subtle grin. If they try again, I already have my next move ready. The camera of the audience lingers on the silent pipeline, the calm neighborhood, and John's confident silhouette, a story of courage, intelligence, and a clever fight for what's yours, leaving viewers both satisfied and eager for what might come next.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it.